It all started with a letter, one of those overly formal, borderline condescending notices printed on crisp white paper. It was the kind of letter that makes you feel like you've done something wrong before you even read a single word. My name was stamped at the top, followed by an official-looking HOA seal that, for all I knew, had been printed off a cheap inkjet printer. The words that followed made my blood boil. Dear homeowner, due to recent adjustments in HOA property allocation, the barn located on your property has been reassigned for community use as the official HOA storage facility. Please remove all personal belongings within 7 days to allow for an organized transition. I had to read it twice, then a third time. They weren't asking to use my barn. They weren't suggesting I rent it to them. They were declaring that my property, the one I built with my own money, was now under their control. Just like that. No discussion, no permission. For a moment, I actually laughed. It was absurd, completely insane. My barn was not, and had never been, part of the HOA. I had made absolutely sure of that when I bought my property. It sat just outside their official boundaries. Yet somehow, they thought they could claim it like a medieval king seizing land from a peasant. The amusement didn't last long. A slow burn of anger crept into my chest, tightening every muscle in my body. This wasn't just some clerical error. This was Karen. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Karen. She was the self-appointed queen of the HOA, a woman who treated her position like a throne, ruling over the community with an iron fist and a clipboard. She had a rule for everything: grass height, mailbox colors, even the acceptable tone of Christmas decorations. And now, apparently, she had taken it upon herself to expand her little kingdom. I didn't bother calling her. That would just give her time to prepare some long-winded excuse wrapped in fake legal jargon. No, I was going to handle this in person. I marched down the street, past rows of identical, regulation-approved houses, until I reached Karen's domain, a beige monstrosity with a perfectly trimmed lawn that looked more artificial than real grass. Her driveway was spotless, her porch immaculately staged like a magazine cover. It was the kind of house that looked like no one actually lived in it. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder. A moment later, the door swung open, and there she stood, wearing a pastel sweater, pearls, and an expression that screamed, "What now?" "Jake," she said with a smile so fake it could have been plastic. "What a surprise. Can I help you with something?" I held up the letter. "You want to explain this?" Her eyes flickered over the paper, but if she felt even a flicker of guilt, she didn't show it. "Oh yes, I was meaning to talk to you about that. We've had some concerns about space for HOA equipment, lawn mowers, maintenance tools, seasonal decorations. Yours is in the perfect location for it." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. "So you just took it?" I asked, my voice sharp enough to cut through her syrupy tone. "Well, no one took anything," she said with a light laugh, as if I were being ridiculous. "It's still your barn, technically. We're just reassigning it for community use. You'll still have access to it during designated hours, of course." I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. "Karen, I'm not in the HOA." She sighed, shaking her head like she was disappointed in a misbehaving child. "Jake, we've talked about this before. While your house is outside the official HOA jurisdiction, your property affects the neighborhood aesthetic. It's only fair that." "Fair?" I cut her off. "Fair is me using the land I paid for without some power-hungry committee dictating what I can and can't do with it. My barn is not part of the HOA. It never has been. So you can take this letter and shove it." Karen's smile finally cracked. Her lips pressed together, her grip tightening around the edge of the door. "I was really hoping we could handle this civilly, Jake. But if you're going to be difficult, I should remind you that non-compliance with HOA policies can result in fines. Liens, even." I took a step closer, towering over her. "Try it," I said, voice low and steady. "Try putting a lien on property you have no legal claim to. I dare you." For the first time, Karen hesitated. I could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes, but she was too deep into her own delusions to back down completely. "I'll have to escalate this to the HOA board," she sniffed, regaining her composure. "If you refuse to cooperate, they'll decide the next course of action." I scoffed. "You mean you will decide?" Karen didn't deny it. Instead, she gave me a look of manufactured pity. "I really don't want this to turn into a legal matter, Jake. It would be such a shame to see unnecessary disputes over something that could benefit everyone." I had to walk away before I said something I'd regret. She thought she had the upper hand. She thought I'd cave like so many others had before me. But Karen had underestimated one thing. I don't back down. By the time I got back home, I could already see the storm brewing. A couple of Karen's cronies were loitering near my barn, whispering amongst themselves like a pair of overgrown schoolchildren. Word was spreading. HOA members were already treating my barn like it was theirs. That's when I knew this wasn't going to end with a few angry words or an ignored letter. Karen wanted a fight. Fine, she was about to get one, and she had no idea just how messy it was going to get. The next morning, I woke up to something that nearly made me put my fist through the nearest wall. A brand new sign had been nailed to my barn door. Not a flimsy little piece of paper, but an actual metal sign, professionally made, gleaming in the morning sun. The bold black letters read, HOA Storage Facility, Members Only. I stood outside, fists clenched. A quick look around told me everything I needed to know. The job had been done overnight, under the cover of darkness. They hadn't even bothered to hide it. Whoever had put this here wanted me to see it the second I stepped outside. This wasn't a request. This was a declaration. My barn had officially been claimed. I ripped the sign down, tossing it into the dirt. But before I could take another breath, a familiar voice called out, "Tampering with HOA property is a violation of community guidelines." I turned to see Karen standing at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, that ever-present clipboard in hand. Her expression was a mix of triumph and condescension, the look of someone who believed they had already won before the battle even started. "That's not HOA property," I snapped, pointing at the barn. "It's mine, and you are trespassing." Karen smiled like I had just told her a joke she found amusing but a little beneath her. "Jake, I think you're overreacting. The board has already approved the barn's reassignment. We had a meeting last night." "A meeting?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean you sat in your house with your little group of minions and made a decision about something that doesn't belong to you?" She ignored my words and flipped through her clipboard with practiced elegance. "As per section, don't even start." I took a step closer. "This is my land, my barn. You have no legal right to it." Karen's expression didn't change. If anything, she looked amused by my anger. "Oh, Jake, you're being difficult again. This is for the good of the community. Surely you can see that." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Losing my temper wouldn't help anything. "Karen, let me make this clear. I am not in the HOA. My property is not in the HOA. You have no authority here." She sighed dramatically, as if I were a petulant child refusing to eat my vegetables. "I had hoped you would be more cooperative, but that's all right. We have procedures in place for situations like this." I narrowed my eyes. "What the hell does that mean?" She glanced up from her clipboard, meeting my gaze with a smirk. "You'll see." And with that, she turned on her heel and walked away, her ridiculous wedge heels clicking against the pavement. I stood there for a long moment, watching her leave, feeling the slow burn of rage settle deep in my gut. Karen had just declared war, and she had no idea who she was messing with. I spent the next hour making phone calls, starting with my lawyer. He confirmed what I already knew. The HOA had no jurisdiction over my property. Legally, they couldn't enforce anything on me. But the problem was, Karen didn't play by the rules. She relied on intimidation, on pushing people around until they gave in. And if that didn't work, she found ways to make their lives miserable. I needed a counterattack, something that would make it clear once and for all that my barn was off limits. That's when I had an idea, a ridiculous, insane, absolutely perfect idea. A few months ago, my uncle had been dealing with thieves sneaking onto his farm and stealing supplies. His solution? Roosters. Not just any roosters, but the most aggressive, territorial, downright feral birds I had ever seen in my life. They attacked anything that moved, including him on occasion. He had once told me, half-jokingly, that they were better security than a pack of trained guard dogs. The more I thought about it, the more the idea took shape in my mind. Karen wanted my barn. Fine. She could have it, along with a dozen raging, battle-hardened roosters ready to defend their new home with their lives. I made the call. My uncle didn't even ask questions. He just laughed and told me to bring my truck. That night, under the cover of darkness, I executed my plan. I drove out to my uncle's farm and loaded up 12 of his finest, meanest roosters. These weren't your average barnyard birds. These were feathered demons, creatures of pure chaos bred to fight and defend. The second they were in the cages, they started squawking and thrashing, already furious before they even knew what was happening. By the time I got them home, I could barely contain my excitement. I carefully placed them inside the barn, spreading out food and water to keep them comfortable, but ensuring they were on high alert. The second someone walked in, they were in for the shock of their lives. I barely slept that night, anticipation buzzing in my veins like electricity. The next morning, I woke up early and positioned myself by the window, waiting. It didn't take long. By mid-morning, a group of HOA members showed up, led by none other than Karen herself. They strolled up to my barn with the arrogance of people who believe they own the world. One of the men carried a key, ready to unlock the doors and claim their prize. The moment the doors swung open, all hell broke loose. A tidal wave of feathers and rage exploded from the barn. The roosters shot out like missiles, screeching at the top of their lungs, wings flapping wildly. Screams filled the air as the HOA members scattered. One man tripped over his own feet, falling flat on his back as a rooster landed on his chest, pecking wildly. Another woman shrieked as she ran in circles, swatting at the air as two birds chased her with relentless determination. Karen stood frozen in place, her eyes wide with horror. And then, to my absolute delight, a rooster locked eyes with her. It was like something out of an old western, a silent standoff. The rooster tilted its head, sizing her up, its beady little eyes full of malice. Then it charged. Karen let out a noise somewhere between a gasp and a shriek, spinning on her heel and running for her life. The rooster was right behind her, flapping and screeching, pecking at her legs as she bolted down the street, clipboard forgotten in the chaos. I stepped onto my porch, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with pure satisfaction. Karen didn't stop running until she was halfway down the block. Only then did she whirl around, face red with rage, hair disheveled, and yell, "This isn't over, Jake." I grinned. Oh, it was over. And if she tried anything else, I had a dozen more roosters ready to remind her exactly whose barn this was. The aftermath of the rooster ambush was nothing short of legendary. By the time the HOA members managed to scramble away, feathers were scattered across my yard like confetti after a parade. Karen had vanished, retreating back to whatever soulless lair she called home. But I knew this wasn't over. She had taken a hit, but Karen wasn't the kind of person to accept defeat gracefully. No, she was licking her wounds, plotting her next move. I spent the rest of the morning checking on my new feathery security team. The roosters had settled in, strutting around the barn like they owned the place. Every time I walked too close, one of them would puff up, tilt its head, and give me the kind of look that said, "I will fight you, and I will win." I respected that. Word spread quickly about what had happened. By noon, neighbors were slowing down as they passed my property, whispering and pointing at the barn. Some of them gave me nods of approval, quiet little smirks that told me they had been waiting for someone to put Karen in her place. Others just shook their heads, clearly wondering if I had lost my mind. The HOA, however, was dead silent. No emails, no letters, no fake violation notices slipped under my door. That was more concerning than anything. Karen wasn't the type to let something like this slide. If she was quiet, it meant she was planning. And I was right. That night, I was sitting on my porch enjoying the peace and quiet when I saw a car creeping down the street. Not the usual casual drive-by, but a slow, deliberate roll. The headlights were off, and it stopped just short of my property. I leaned forward, watching. A figure stepped out, small, quick, and careful. Even in the dim light, I recognized the stiff posture, the clipped movements. Karen. She was holding something, a phone most likely. She moved toward my barn, stopping just outside the fence, and raised the device, probably taking pictures or recording a video. I smirked. Classic Karen. She was gathering evidence, building some ridiculous case against me. Maybe she'd claim the roosters were a health hazard. Maybe she'd try to get animal control involved. It didn't matter. I wasn't breaking any laws. I stood up slowly, making sure she saw me. Karen froze for a moment. We just stared at each other. Then she turned on her heel and rushed back to her car. Tires screeched as she peeled away. The next morning, the retaliation began. First came the county inspector. A man in a button-up and khakis knocked on my door, clipboard in hand, wearing the expression of someone who had better things to do. He informed me that he had received a report about unpermitted livestock on my property. I smiled and invited him to check for himself. He did a quick walk around, nodded approvingly, and confirmed that I was well within my rights to keep the roosters. He even chuckled when I told him why they were there. He left without issue. Next came the noise complaints. According to Karen, my roosters were causing significant distress to the neighborhood with their crowing. I pointed out that we lived in a semi-rural area where plenty of people had chickens. Besides, the HOA didn't have noise ordinances against farm animals. That complaint went nowhere. Karen was getting desperate. 2 days later, a fake HOA violation notice appeared in my mailbox demanding I remove the Roosters within 48 hours or face severe penalties. The paper even had an official-looking stamp, but I knew better. I crumpled it up and tossed it without a second thought. That same evening, as I was locking up the barn, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. Someone was in my yard. I turned quickly, heart pounding. A shadowy figure was crouched near the barn door, fiddling with the latch. For half a second, I thought it was some dumb teenager looking for trouble. But then the porch light hit the side of their face, and I saw the unmistakable bob of Karen's hair. She was trying to open the barn. I didn't think. I just acted. I stepped forward, letting my boots crunch loudly against the gravel. Karen whipped around, eyes wide with panic. She wasn't expecting to be caught. "Enjoying yourself?" I asked, voice calm but firm. Karen straightened up, smoothing out her blouse as if she hadn't just been caught red-handed. "I was simply investigating a potential safety concern." I crossed my arms. "On private property?" Without permission, she opened her mouth, probably to throw out some nonsense excuse, but I didn't give her the chance. "You do realize," I continued, taking a step closer, "that breaking and entering is a crime, right? Not just an HOA rule violation. An actual crime." Karen's face twitched. "I wasn't breaking and entering." I gestured to the barn door she had been messing with. "So you just happened to be touching the lock? In the dark? On my land?" She huffed, lifting her chin. "I have every right to ensure that my community is safe from nuisances and hazards." I grinned. "Well, if you wanted to see inside so badly, why didn't you just say so?" Before she could react, I reached forward and flung the barn door wide open. The Roosters had been resting, but the sudden flood of light and movement startled them. They exploded into action, wings flapping, loud, angry squawks filling the air. The nearest one immediately went for Karen's legs. She screamed, stumbling backward, arms flailing as she tried to escape. The Roosters did not relent. They chased her across my yard, relentless and furious, pecking and scratching at her heels. I leaned against the barn door, watching the show with pure satisfaction. Karen made it to the street, panting and disheveled, one of her shoes missing somewhere in the chaos. She spun around, face red with rage. "You'll regret this, Jake." I laughed. "Oh, I really won't." She stumped off, defeated once again, leaving behind nothing but a trail of crushed grass and wounded pride. I turned back to my barn, where the Roosters had already settled, looking pleased with themselves. "Good work, boys," I muttered, locking the door. Karen was running out of options. She had tried intimidation, manipulation, even trespassing, and nothing had worked. But I knew she wasn't done yet. She couldn't afford to lose. This wasn't just about the barn anymore. This was personal, and I was more than ready for whatever came next. The calm didn't last long. I knew it wouldn't. Karen wasn't the type to walk away quietly, especially not after being humiliated twice. I had expected some kind of retaliation, but even I wasn't prepared for how far she would take it. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of someone knocking, no, pounding on my front door. When I opened it, I was met with two uniformed officers standing on my porch. Their expressions were unreadable, professional, but I could already guess why they were here. "Mr. Jacobson?" one of them asked. "Yeah," I replied, bracing myself. "We received a report of illegal livestock being housed on your property," the officer continued. "There have been multiple complaints from the HOA regarding noise disturbances, health concerns, and potential safety hazards. We need to inspect the premises." I took a slow breath, keeping my irritation in check. Karen had escalated her game. She must have filed multiple complaints, enough to get the county involved. She was trying to bury me under bureaucracy, hoping that some obscure ordinance or technicality would force me to get rid of the Roosters. I stepped aside, motioning for them to come in. "Go ahead, but I'll save you some time. Everything is legal." The officers moved through my property with the kind of efficiency that told me they had done this before. One of them examined the barn, checking for any signs of mistreatment or violations. The other took notes, occasionally glancing at me as if trying to gauge whether I was hiding anything. The Roosters, of course, were their usual charming selves. One of them even took a swipe at an officer's boot, which earned a smirk from the man, but no real concern. They weren't being abused. They weren't neglected. They were just doing their job. After about 15 minutes, the lead officer nodded. "Everything checks out. The Roosters are registered as property guardians, and there are no violations that would warrant their removal." I grinned. "Would you like me to put that in writing for the HOA?" The officer chuckled. Not our jurisdiction, but I'd recommend keeping an eye out. Seems like someone is trying really hard to cause you trouble. Yeah, I muttered. I got a pretty good idea who that is. The officers left without incident, but the encounter left me on edge. Karen was getting desperate. She had tried intimidation, legal loopholes, even trespassing, and none of it had worked. If she couldn't win through normal means, she was bound to try something underhanded. I didn't have to wait long to find out what that was. That night, as I was locking up, I noticed something strange near my property line. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as I got closer, I realized someone had dumped a pile of feed just outside my fence. Not my feed. It was scattered haphazardly, too much for it to be an accident. Someone had intentionally put it there, hoping the roosters would get out and cause trouble. If they wandered into the street or a neighbor's yard, Karen could use that as ammunition against me. She could argue they were a danger, that they had become a public nuisance. I clenched my jaw. This was low, even for her. I grabbed a rake and cleaned up the mess, making sure none of the roosters got near it. Then I checked the fence, reinforcing any weak spots just in case. If Karen wanted to play dirty, she was going to have to try a lot harder than that. The next morning, another surprise waited for me, this time in the form of an official-looking letter taped to my front door. It was from Karen. The letter was full of legal-sounding nonsense, but the gist of it was clear. She was formally demanding the removal of the roosters within 48 hours, citing excessive disturbances, property devaluation, and community safety risks. She had even included signatures from some of her loyal HOA followers, as if that gave her any actual authority. I laughed as I crumpled the paper in my hands. She was grasping at straws. Later that afternoon, I decided it was time to take the fight directly to her. I walked straight into the next HOA meeting, which was held in the community clubhouse, a place I normally avoided like the plague. As soon as I entered, conversations hushed. Karen, who had been standing at the front of the room, stiffened when she saw me. "Jake," she said, forcing a tight-lipped smile. "This meeting is for HOA members only." I held up her letter. "Then maybe you should stop sending HOA business to non-members." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. I could see some of the neighbors watching with interest, curious about what was going to happen. Karen cleared her throat, clearly flustered but trying not to show it. "That letter was a formality," she said smoothly. "We are simply requesting that you comply with reasonable community standards." I tilted my head. "Reasonable? You mean like when you tried to steal my barn? Or when you filed false complaints to the county? Or my personal favorite, when you tried to break into my property in the middle of the night?" Gasps echoed around the room. Karen's face went pale. "That's a ridiculous accusation. Is it?" I pulled out my phone, tapping the screen a few times before holding it up. "Because my security cameras say otherwise." I played the footage. The grainy black and white video clearly showed Karen creeping toward my barn, fiddling with the lock. Her face was unmistakable. The room erupted into whispers. A few people looked at Karen with wide eyes, clearly uncomfortable. Others just shook their heads, muttering under their breath. Karen's face turned red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I was checking for violations. I smirked. "So, in other words, trespassing?" Silence. Karen's grip tightened on the podium. "This is irrelevant. The real issue here is the roosters." I sighed dramatically. "You mean the roosters that are legally allowed to be on my property? The ones that, as the county confirmed, aren't breaking any rules?" More silence. I turned to the rest of the HOA members. "Look, I get it. Karen loves to run things. But you all might want to ask yourselves if you really want someone in charge who thinks she can just take whatever she wants. Today it's my barn. Tomorrow, who knows?" More people were nodding now, some of them shifting uncomfortably. Karen's grip on control was slipping, and she knew it. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for support, but she was coming up empty. She had lost. I didn't wait for her to sputter out some lame defense. I turned and walked out, leaving her to deal with the fallout. The next day, the HOA sent out a notice. It wasn't an apology, but it was close enough. It stated that all disputes regarding non-HOA properties were to be considered outside of their jurisdiction. In other words, they were backing off. And just like that, my barn was mine again. Karen, on the other hand, had gone silent. No more threats, no more letters, no more underhanded tricks. For the first time in a long while, I had peace. But I had a feeling this wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. For the first time in weeks, I had peace. No fake violation notices, no unannounced visitors from county inspectors, no Karen lurking around my property, clipboard in hand, trying to find some loophole that would allow her to claim my barn. The HOA had backed off, admitting in their roundabout, bureaucratic way that they had no authority over me. It was a satisfying victory, one that had been earned with a combination of persistence, legal facts, and a well-timed army of angry roosters. But something still nagged at me. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat. She wasn't the type to sit back and say, "Well, I tried my best, guess I'll move on." No, she was plotting. She was biding her time. The quiet wasn't a surrender. It was a recalibration. I didn't have to wait long for her next move. A week after the HOA meeting, I found myself in my driveway, washing down my truck, when a sleek black SUV rolled up to the curb. It was a model that screamed expensive but unearned, the kind of car driven by people who thought owning leather seats made them powerful. The window rolled down, and there she was. Karen. She wasn't wearing her usual pastel sweaters and fake pearls. Instead, she had on a fitted blazer, her hair done up in a way that looked even more rigid than usual. She was trying to look professional, trying to put on a new mask after the last one had been shattered. "Jake," she said smoothly, as if we were old friends who had merely had a little disagreement. I turned off the hose, watching her carefully. "Karen," she smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I thought we should talk." I leaned against my truck, crossing my arms. "We did plenty of talking before. Unless you're here to apologize for trespassing, lying to the county, and generally making my life miserable, I'm not interested." Karen sighed, as if she were dealing with an unruly child. "I think we got off on the wrong foot. I was only trying to do what's best for the community." I actually laughed. "You mean what's best for you?" Her face twitched, but she kept the fake smile intact. "Regardless, I wanted to offer a compromise, something that benefits both of us." I already knew whatever she was about to say was going to be ridiculous, but I gestured for her to continue anyway. "The HOA is prepared to offer you financial compensation for the barn," she said, folding her hands neatly in her lap, as if she were presenting some grand, generous proposal. "We're willing to purchase it at a fair market value and officially designate it as a community storage space. You wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. No more issues, no more disputes." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. "You want to buy my barn?" "Yes," she said with a nod, as if this was the most logical thing in the world. It would resolve all the conflict. We'd pay you handsomely for the structure, and you could use that money for something more useful. Maybe even put up a nice little garden or an outdoor patio, something that would improve the aesthetic of your property. I rubbed my chin, pretending to consider it. "And if I refuse?" Karen's smile wavered just slightly. "I would highly recommend accepting, Jake. This is a very generous offer. The HOA board voted on it, and we all agree it's the best course of action. So let me get this straight," I said, pushing off my truck and stepping closer. "You spent weeks trying to steal my barn. You harassed me. You filed false reports. You even tried breaking in. And now, after all that, you think I'm just going to sell it to you?" Karen's fingers twitched on the steering wheel, but her voice remained controlled. "I'm giving you an opportunity to end this peacefully." I grinned. "You want my barn, Karen? You can have it." She blinked, caught off guard. "Really?" "Absolutely," I said. "For $3 million. Her jaw tightened. "Be serious, Jake." "I am serious," I said, crossing my arms again. "You think you can just waltz in here and throw a few bucks at me like I'm some idiot willing to roll over for pocket change? No. If you want the barn so badly, it's going to cost you." She exhaled sharply, her patience wearing thin. "We're offering you fair market value." "Fair market value doesn't apply when the buyer is desperate," I interrupted. "And let's be honest, Karen, you're desperate." Her nails tapped against the steering wheel. "This isn't over," she muttered. I smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." She sped off, her SUV kicking up dust as she disappeared down the street. I wasn't worried. She had lost, and she knew it. The HOA had no legal claim, no leverage. All she had left was her ego, and that wasn't enough to change reality. Over the next few weeks, things shifted. More and more people started questioning Karen's leadership. Whispers turned into open discussions. The stunt with my barn had made people realize just how far she was willing to go to maintain control. Some people, the ones who had been blindly following her, started distancing themselves. Others began talking about change. Then one day, a notice appeared in mailboxes across the neighborhood. HOA board election. Special recall vote. Karen was being removed. I didn't bother attending the meeting. I already knew how it would go. By the end of the night, the vote was in. Karen was out. A new president was elected, one who immediately made it clear that they wouldn't be wasting HOA resources on personal vendettas. 2 weeks later, Karen sold her house. The for sale sign went up in her perfectly manicured front yard, and within days, she was gone. I never saw her again. The HOA, now under new leadership, actually became tolerable. No more petty fines, no more ridiculous rules. People were given more freedom, more flexibility. It was still an HOA, sure, but at least now it wasn't run like a dictatorship. And my barn? It remained exactly where it was, standing tall, protected, and completely mine. To celebrate, I had a custom sign made. Karen's chicken coop, property of Jake. It hung proudly above the barn doors, a permanent reminder of the battle that had been fought and won. A few of the neighbors laughed when they saw it. Some even stopped by to congratulate me. The Roosters, meanwhile, remained as stubborn and aggressive as ever, still chasing off anything that came too close. And just when I thought everything had finally settled, another letter arrived in my mailbox. This one wasn't from Karen. It was from the new HOA president. Dear Jake, we'd love to discuss a potential storage facility arrangement regarding your barn. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the letter, then looked toward the barn. The roosters fluffed their feathers, watching me expectantly. I grinned. Time to get more roosters.